business in Africa is big business, but it comes with a number of challenges at an operational level as well. We take a look at these challenges and ways that entrepreneurs have been able to circumvent them. In studio, we're joined by Yaron Assabi. He's the CEO of the Digital Solutions Group. Thanks so much, Yaron, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This afternoon. Well, looking at doing business in Africa, we've often heard the phrase the Great Africa Business Migration being used. I mean, to what extent is Africa's potential really being realized, and is there in fact a changing perception when it comes to doing business on the continent?
Most certainly. I mean, we're seeing a lot of investment from foreign companies in Africa. I think the inter-African trade is not as high as it should be, but there's certainly a lot of warmth to South African companies working in Africa. We have offices in Kenya and in Nigeria, and we've done work all over the continent, and it's been a positive experience, but challenging. A lot of challenges in terms of skills, shortage of skills, talent, the ability to trade very easily. It's a very heavily regulated environment from a banking perspective. So in order to convert your currency, you need to apply often to the central bank to be able to do that.
Of course, we can't talk about Africa as this homogenous entity. So let's break it down here, because we're dealing with a myriad of operating environments, each presenting its own set of opportunities and challenges. Well, just how complex an investment picture are we looking at from someone who does business on the continent?
Well, as you rightfully said, the continent is very different and very diverse, and it comes with its own challenges. Doing business in Malawi, for example, they've got a huge currency issue. So unless they do a tobacco auction and they get some investment back in terms of foreign currency, it's very difficult to get your money out. So you've got to actually assess the risk up front. And with one of our projects, we had to wait twice a year we'd get paid, or once a year, which is a different way of actually structuring your deal. I think East Africa is very vibrant, a lot easier to do business than sometimes West Africa, which tends to be a lot more heavily regulated. We do business in both Ghana and Nigeria. But overall, there's big promise for Africa. Over 1 billion consumers in the next couple of years, emerging middle class. Certainly, companies like MTN have done phenomenally well and have created really amazing opportunities and amazing wealth in the region.
I think one of the criticisms, and again we talk about this homogenous, this is Africa and it's difficult to do business with Africa. I think one of the comments that we saw quite a lot of last year was that South Africa has actually become quite arrogant. Is maybe not quite the right word, but we are quite arrogant in terms of our position on the continent. We're very lucky in that we have a lot of first world infrastructure in a lot of cases, but we've almost become, if we're going to go into Africa, we do it the South African way. And I think that one of the interesting things, I sat with one of the Nigerian listed companies, and they'll go and they'll have an annual, where they do the annual financial statements, and where we have 20 analysts in a room, they have 2,000 shareholders on a football field or in a church. And it's very, very different culturally. There's there's quite an engaged audience out there, so long as you can work out how to engage them.
I agree 100%, and that's my approach in expanding into Africa is always get a local partner. The local partner understands the local market, and what works in one market doesn't necessarily work in another. Because of the monetary issues and the ability to apply to central bank. Also, we have BEE in South Africa, and in Africa there's an unspoken BEE. I think that African businesses, if you're in Kenya, Kenyans like to do business with Kenyans. So it makes it a lot easier if you have a local partner that kind of educates you and onboards you on the culture and how to do business in that particular country, because they're all very, very different.
But how do you find that local partner? I mean, I think that's one of the issues.
That's tough.
You can say whether it's Discovery going into China or one of the financial services going to India. I mean, it's very difficult to identify a local partner.
Our experience has been that we often won business first from South Africa. We then would look for local skills. We would do a few projects with a local partner just to test the relationship and the chemistry and make sure that there's a good fit, and then convert it into a JV. So start with an arm's length relationship, get a working relationship going, and see that it all works well and that they can actually facilitate the skills. Because a lot of the time, the biggest issue in IT is being able to find the right local skills. So we often do training in South Africa, or do what's called a design, build, operate, transfer, which means that you actually design the solution, you build it, you operate it, hold the hand of the particular client with your local partner, and then transfer the skills locally to be able to maintain it and support it, because it makes more sense.
What's your assessment of the skills pool that you have access to on the continent?
Well, it's actually changing very quickly, which is very positive. I think with the advent of the internet and with excitement about ICT in general in Africa, we're seeing some really great talent. They may not have as much experience. So we've worked all over the world, and especially in the South African market. We generally have more experience in South Africa than in some other areas in the continent, but there's no lack of skills. It's just a matter of actually doing the skill transfer and the education.
How tough is that fight for the skills pool that you have access to, with specifically a competition rising very rapidly within that IT space?
Absolutely. So to retain the talent is a big issue. So once you get the skill, to retain them, and also everybody wants the same pool of talent, and there's a very short
What's that doing to
pool.
the cost of doing business?
It's a lot higher, and as a continent that should be positioning itself like India or China, if we look at the other BRICS countries, where we should have low-cost skills available in the region, I see a lot of outsourcing still happening to Chinese companies and Indian companies, specifically because the costs are so high and because of this talent.
I think one of the anecdotal
issue.
interesting things, if you go and actually look at the Harvard MBAs for the alumni, you'll actually find that Harvard's actually, Nigeria's actually got one of the highest, excluding the BRICS and obviously Europe, has got one of the highest levels of alumni in the last couple of years. So I mean, I do think that the skills are starting to go, and importantly in Nigeria's case, they're coming back into the country themselves. You know, they're coming back to Nigeria. They're not just being educated in the US and staying in the US. They're coming back and they're doing business locally.
I agree with Mark. There's a big homecoming revolution. Everybody understands there's a big opportunity in Africa. So they might be studying in the UK and the US, but they come back to Africa because they're, I think, kind of attached to the continent. It's a wonderful continent, and they come with great skills, and that's what's really raising the levels of entrepreneurship. And I think to grow the economy, we need more entrepreneurs, because those are the small businesses and big businesses that create the jobs, and we have a huge unemployment issue in Africa throughout the continent.
One of the things which does look quite interesting is, you know, this competition of South Africa versus Kenya at the moment. I think that South Africa has become quite lazy and has started missing out on opportunities where a lot of the multinationals are actually using Kenya as their landing point. Maybe just some quick comment on, where is it actually easy to do business? I mean, we always presume that it's difficult, but Kenya, I think, has made a lot of strides. I believe Ghana has made quite a lot of strides. I mean, where do you find it easy to do business in Africa?
If you consider Mauritius part of Africa,
yep.
Mauritius is probably the most geared from a financial hub perspective. I think they are the most mature in the way they look at it, and they actually try and attract foreign direct investment. And our holding company that owns all the companies in Africa is actually based in Mauritius. But Kenya has made a lot of strides. I mean, companies like Bharti Airtel set up head office there because 16 opcos, it's much easier to manage it from East Africa, and they've selected it over South Africa, which is interesting. But I think all of them have different challenges. You know, from our experience working in Africa over 10 years now, you know, finding the right local partner, as I said earlier, is the key, but also having the right relationships with government and understanding the local way of doing business, and gearing yourself to changing the way you engage with customers and the way you engage with local business to be able to meet all the local regulatory environments. So, you know, when you're doing business in Nigeria, understand that the time to get the payment out will take a lot longer. If you're doing business in Malawi, you know, you've got to be patient.